We should hear good news.
So the kids have to clean up the dishes. Clean up the dishes.
Okay, guys, you ready when you are? Shalom? You want to begin? Let's begin.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel, for inviting me. It's a tremendous honor to be a part of the important work you're doing with the Shidduch Project. As Rachel mentioned, we're learning this afternoon in the zchut for everyone to find their zivug, their shidduch, their better half, and also in the merit of a refuah shlema for Rachel's mother, Sarah Tema Bas Miriam. And this morning, we're going to take a look at Yom Yerushalayim, which is this week, which is celebrated here in the state of Israel. Not too many people know too much about it outside the state of Israel. It doesn't really get celebrated the same way in Chutz La'aretz. I joke that, as a child growing up in northern New Jersey, and going to yeshiva day school and yeshiva high school in northern New Jersey, for me, Yom HaTzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim were days when you ate a falafel and you had a blue and white cookie, and maybe you sang Hatikva. But here in the modern state of Israel, these are days that are celebrated as Yomim Tovim, as holidays, with the recitation of Hallel and other tefillos. Following the miraculous birth of the state of Israel in 1948 and the dramatic reclamation of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount in 1967, the Rabbanut HaRashit, the chief rabbinate here in Israel, together with leading poskim, established Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim as I said, Yomim Tovim, full-fledged festivals with the recitation of Hallel and other special tefillos. Many shuls will have a tefillah chagigit. Even shuls and communities that are maybe less Zioni, less Zionistic, will also sometimes even mark the days by not reciting Tachanun. The old joke is sometimes they'll ask, what are you doing for Yom HaAtzmaut or Yom Yerushalayim? What does your shul do? So they say, we follow the minhag of Ben Gurion. Minhag of Ben Gurion. What's the minhag of Ben Gurion? Well, they don't say Tachanun, but they also don't say Hallel. Ben Gurion didn't say Hallel, he didn't say Tachanun. Okay, it's a joke. But the question debated by many was, is it permissible to add a new holiday to the Jewish calendar? And that's what I'd like to explore together with you this afternoon. Is Yom Yerushalayim a Jewish holiday? Is Yom Yerushalayim a Halachik holiday? The Ramban, in his Perush, the Parshas Vaschonan, defines the Isser of Bal Tosif, adding new mitzvos to the Torah, and writes that creating a new holiday is an example of Bal Tosif. But the question is, what kind of holiday does the Ramban mean? Now, it's interesting, if you take a look at the Lashon of the Ramban there, in his comments to Parshas Vaschonan, he writes that it's usher to add a new holiday to the Jewish calendar, to create a new holiday like the holiday of Yeravam ben Nevat. So who is Yeravam ben Nevat? Yeravam ben Nevat, of course, we need a little background, was a melech of the northern kingdom. Following the death of King Shlomo Melech, he took the 10 tribes and made himself king of the northern kingdom, Malchut Yisrael. In fact, his very name implies division. Yeravam, as Chazal explained, comes from Riv and Am. He caused a split, a riv, a fight within the nation. It's the paradigm of the wicked king, a king that is wicked and causes others to sin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, of course, says that he has no share in the world to come. He has no chelik in Olam Haba. And in Sefer Melachim Aleph, in Perek Yud Beis, describes how he prevented people from being Oleh L'Regel, going up to Yerushalayim. He placed guards, placed sentries, preventing people from coming up on Aliyah L'Regel. If you're familiar with the holiday of Tu B'Av, which is a special day for singles, day for shidduchim, as the Mishnah and the Gemara at the very end of Maseches Tanis describes. So one of the reasons why Tu B'Av is celebrated as a festive day is because the sentries that Yerovam had placed preventing people from coming on Aliyah L'Regel were finally removed. And of course, he made Eglei Zav, he made golden calves. He placed them in Beit El and in Beit Dan, as the Navi describes. He built an idolatrous temple in Beit El to compete with the Beis Hamikdash. There he set up an altar. He brought korbanos, brought sacrifices, and he established a new holiday on the 15th of the 8th month, which is Cheshvan. The 8th month is Cheshvan. That's significant because Cheshvan has no holidays. It's one of the reasons why it's called Mar Cheshvan. It's not explained. Mar, bitter. It's bitter because it has no holidays. So the Navi describes how he established a new holiday on the 15th of the month of Cheshvan, and he tried to convince people that this is when the Chag HaAsif, the holiday of the ingathering, is supposed to be celebrated. Because Sukkot, which is celebrated in Tishrei, well, the crops are not really ready to be gathered. Not all the crops in the field are ready to be gathered yet. And so he timed it that the Chag HaAsif should really be in the month of Cheshvan. And so it's very telling that the Ramban cites an example from Yeravam ben Avad and from Sefer Melachim, Perek Yud Beis, to tell us that it's inappropriate or maybe even a violation of Isser Baal Tosef in establishing a new holiday. Again, what kind of holiday is the Ramban talking about? And then the Ramban continues and goes ahead and mentions Purim and the reading of the Megillah, and he cites a passage from the Gemara in Megillah, in the Bavli, and in the Yerushalmi, to suggest that even Purim, it wasn't so simple. That the Chachamim didn't eagerly accept Purim as a new holiday. The Gemara there says there were 180 Nevi'im, and they didn't add or subtract anything from the Torah, except for the one thing that was added was Mikra Megillah. And the Yerushalmi also emphasizes that it wasn't so simple, it wasn't so easy for the holiday of Purim to be accepted by Klal Yisrael. You know, at the very end of Sefer Esther, Megillas Esther in Perek Tes, for instance, it's described how there's this back and forth between Mordechai and Esther and the Jewish people until they finally accepted upon themselves, until they finally accepted the holiday Purim upon themselves. And the Gemara in Megillah on Daf Zion describes this debate and discussion, this back and forth between Esther, Hamalka, and the Chachamim, where Esther is begging them, Kiv'uni lidoros, establish me for generations, meaning establish this holiday. Mordechai and Esther are pleading with the Chachamim to establish Purim. And Esther is pleading, Kisvuni lidoros, write me down for generations, meaning include the Megillah, the book of Esther, in the Tanakh, which also the Chachamim weren't so eager to do. So it's interesting that the Ramban uses Purim as an example, to suggest that it's not so simple to just add a holiday to the Jewish calendar, but it's unique that he uses Purim as an example, because throughout history, as we'll see together this afternoon, communities and individuals who experienced the miraculous salvation established a Purim Sheni, a day to be celebrated like Purim, to give thanks to Hashem. So there is a precedent, as we'll see later on this afternoon, of creating a new holiday, either for an individual or his family, or for an entire community. We'll also see that during the Second Temple period, by Sheni, there were a whole host of days celebrated as festivals collected in a scroll known as Megillas Tainus. So how did they get away with that, according to the Ramban? Obviously, if it's sanctioned by a Beis Din, if it's sanctioned by the Chachamim, it's not prohibited. To establish a day like Yeravam ben Avad, of course, is Asr. And maybe even to establish a day with no particular rhyme or reason, it would also maybe be a violation of Baal Tosef, according to the Ramban. But to create a day and to pattern it after Purim, a day which celebrates some miraculous salvation, as we'll see together this afternoon, is not only permissible, but maybe it's even required, a chiyuv, according to some opinions. There's a very important posek who lived in the 15th and 16th centuries by the name of the Maram al-Ashkar. Rabbi Moshe ben Yitzchak al-Ashkar lived from 1466 to 1542. He was born in Spain. He was expelled in 1492 during the Gerush. He lived in North Africa. He was a rabbi in Cairo. He served on the Beis Din of the Radbaz there in Cairo. And he ultimately settled in Eretz Yisrael 3 years before his death, where he lived in Tzfas and Yerushalayim. He was a major posek and received questions from all over the Jewish world. In fact, he even would complain that answering these inquiries took up much of his time. kind of like a rabbi's life on Erev Pesach, when you get all sorts of shilos, but really you need to help your wife kasha the oven in the kitchen, but you're too busy. So he was posed a question by the Jewish community of Lepanto, which today is Nafpaktos in western Greece. It's on the coast. Here was the shiloh. The leaders and Beis Din of the Jewish community of Lepanto in western Greece had established a holiday like Purim to be celebrated on the 11th of Teves, to give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for some sort of Yeshua, some sort of miraculous salvation. Now, it's not clear exactly what happened. Some associated with the famous Battle of Lepanto, which you can Google it after the shir. It's not so pertinent. The Battle of Lepanto is a naval battle that took place between the Ottoman Emperor and the Holy League, basically the Catholic Church and the Turks, the Ottomans, the Muslims. Throughout the medieval period, they were constantly warring with one another over territory. But some make the mistake and think that that's what he's responding to, but that happens later. That takes place in 1157. And as I mentioned, the Maram al-Ashkar dies in 1542. So, sorry, that would be 1557. Anyway, the Battle of Lepanto is after the death already of the Maram al-Ashkar, but it was some other either pogrom or some sort of war. There was some mess that happened, and the Jewish community was miraculously saved. From the tshuva, we don't really know all the details. But so they established this holiday on the 11th of Teves to give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And they patterned it after Purim. They write that it's a Yom Kippurim, or they established Yom Kiyom Purim, L'chol Dvarav, Kidei Lefarsem Nes, in order to publicize this miracle. And they imposed this on future generations, even on those no longer living in the community. So some of the members of the community inquired of Rabbi Moshe al-Ashkar, and they asked him, number one, do the leaders of a community have the authority to establish such a holiday? And two, is it binding on those who are no longer living in the community and for future generations? So the Maram al-Ashkar cites the Gemara in Bava Basra that permits the leaders of a city to institute binding decrees on its residents. You have many sugyos, many discussions there in the Gemara, how the leaders of a city have rights and authority over the city, and they can make such decrees, and they can institute binding decrees on the residents, etc. So he rules, based on his Gemara in Bava Basra, that indeed the community leaders have the authority to establish such a holiday, and indeed it's binding on the members of the community, present and future. And as we'll see together this afternoon throughout Jewish history, tens of communities and even individuals would establish Purims to commemorate and contextualize and give religious expression to some salvation, some Yeshua, some Hatzalah, just like the Jews of Lepanto. But the Pri Chodosh lives about a century later after the Maram al-Ashkar. Rabbi Chizkiah de Silva was very upset with this practice. The Pri Chodosh lives from 1659 to 1698. He was born in Livorno, Italy. At around the age of 20, he moves to Yerushalayim. And in the tshuva, he's very critical of communities like Lepanto and like Egypt for establishing new holidays. There's a Purim that the Jews of Egypt observed. He takes issue with the Jewish community in Cairo for other reasons as well. There's an axe to grind with them. And he bases his objection on something I've already mentioned, what's called Megillas Tanis. This list of about 35 or 36 festivals which were observed during Tkufas Bayis Sheni, the Second Temple period. And it lists dates on which fasting, that's why it gets its name Megillas Tanis, it's days on which fasting, tanios, and eulogies, hespedim, were prohibited. And the Pri Chodosh, he cites a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, and Daf Yud Ches, which relates to machlokes, whether or not this list of festivals, all of these holidays, are null and void following the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Batla Megillas Tanis. The machlokus in the Gemara, and the maskana we assume is that yes, Batla Megillas Tanis. So the Pri Chodosh says we no longer have the authority to observe these festivals or create new festivals because this list of festivals that we had during the Second Temple period becomes null and void. The Gemara actually brings the pasuk in Zechariah Perek Ches, 8th chapter of Zechariah, which describes how Mirz Hashem in the future all of the 4 fasts that the Chachamim instituted for the destruction of the holy temples will turn into festivals. Our fasts will become feasts. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Ko amar Hashem tzvakos, tzom haravi, v'tzom hachamishi, v'tzom hashvi, v'tzom hasiri. The fast of the 4th, and the fast of the 5th, and the 7th, and the 10th. Yelaveis Yehuda l'sason u'lesimcha u'lemoadim tovim. They will be for the house of Yehuda, for sason and simcha. They will become days of joy and gladness, the Navi says. And so the Gemara there in Rosh Hashanah and Daf Yud Ches says, when it's a time of shalom, when there's peace, when there's a Beis Hamikdash, these fast days will be sason l'simcha. Ein shalom, but if there is no peace, so then we have to fast. And so, accordingly, the Pri Chadash rules, based on this Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, that says that Batla Megillas Tanis, these festivals that were observed during the Second Temple period, are no longer observed. The Pri Chadash rules that a community does not have the authority to declare new festivals today. Kal v'chomer, an individual. But the Chasam Sofer defends the practice of instituting new holidays in our day. And he argues that even according to the opinion that Megillas Tanis is null and void, Batla Megillas Tanis, the holidays of Chanukah and Purim were never nullified. Okay, so it's interesting. Even if you assume Batla Megillas Tanis, well, among the holidays listed in Megillas Tanis, you have Purim and Chanukah. And Purim and Chanukah were not nullified. We observe Purim and Chanukah until today. Okay, so Purim and Chanukah are the exceptions to the rule. Megillas Tanis lists, as I mentioned, festivals that were connected with the Beis Hamikdash. The observance of Purim and Chanukah is even outside the Beis Hamikdash. And so the Chasam Sofer explains in the Tshuva, in Orach Chaim, Kuf Tzadi Aleph, that festivals created by a community or by individuals to commemorate a miraculous salvation, some sort of Yeshua, some sort of Hatzalah, are patterned after Purim and Chanukah and are therefore permissible. And he concludes his Tshuva by noting how he, the Chasam Sofer, and his Rebbe, Rav Nosson Adler, were careful to observe Purim Frankfurt, also known as Purim Vincennes, even when they were no longer living in Frankfurt. The Chasam Sofer, of course, moves to Hungary. He establishes a yeshiva in Presburg, which is today Bratislava in Slovakia. He was the Rav and the Rosh Yeshiva there. What is this holiday, Purim Frankfurt, Purim Vincennes? It's interesting. I've been to Frankfurt many times. Purim Frankfurt, or Purim Vincennes, is still observed by the Jewish community in Frankfurt today. They do something to mark the occasion. There was a grocer and gingerbread baker, yes, gingerbread baker by the name of Vincenz Fettmilch, who led a popular uprising in Germany between 1612 and 1616. They demanded lower cost of living, lower prices. They wanted to get rid of foreigners, wanted to get rid of competition. Sounds a lot like what's happening in Europe today. And when things are bad, who do you blame? Of course, the Jews, the Yidden, whom they viewed as competition, and they blame them for engaging in usury, for lending with interest. The Jews, of course, were always the scapegoat, always blamed throughout Jewish history. And on August 22nd, 1614, Vincenz Fettmilch led a mob that stormed the Judengasse, the Jews' lane. That was the Jewish neighborhood there in Frankfurt. We know where that is still today. It's a long street where the Jews lived. And they attacked around 1,400 Jews, and they stole and looted and forced the Jews to flee the city until the emperor himself personally intervened. And on February 28th, 1616, it was the 20th of Adar, Fettmilch and 6 others were executed in Frankfurt's Ross Market, which is the horse market, Ross Market Square, which is still there today in the center of the city. I've seen it with my own eyes when I visited Frankfurt to teach. You could visit the Ross Market, the horse market today. And so on February 28th, 1616, the emperor finally, he stopped the uprising and hanged this Fettmilch and 6 others and executed them. So on the same day, the Jews were led back into Frankfurt by imperial soldiers. Above the gates to the Judengasse, they placed a stone with the imperial eagle on it, bearing the inscription, protected by the Roman imperial majesty and Holy Empire. Okay? And so they established that day, the 20th of Adar, as Purim Frankfurt. As I mentioned, Purim Frankfurt is still marked today. So in Frankfurt, they have two Purims in the month of Adar. They have Purim on the 14th of Adar, and then they have Purim Frankfurt on the 20th of Adar. In another tshuva, the Chasam Sofer is very critical of celebrating Lag BaOmer. Yes, you heard that right. Very critical of celebrating Lag BaOmer. And it's a tshuva, if you're interested, it's in the Yoredeya Reish Lamed Gimel. It's a tshuva where he's discussing the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, the Kedusha of Yerushalayim, and that even following the Churban, Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim retains their Kedusha. And then he goes off on a tangent and starts talking about Lag BaOmer. He doesn't like Lag BaOmer. He's very critical. It's very strong language. It doesn't mince any words. He's very critical of the fact that he feels they've left Yerushalayim and are making these pilgrimages instead up to Tzfat and up to Meron. He sees it as a slight to Yerushalayim. Actually interesting. The Chasam Sofer in his drashos has a hesped, a eulogy for those who died in this awful earthquake that took place in Tzfas. You could say, what kind of eulogy is it? But he actually condemns them and blames them for leaving Yerushalayim and settling up in Tzfas and Meron, and again sees it as a slight to Yerushalayim, and in a sense blames them for the fact that there was this earthquake. Without getting into the theological ramifications and implications of what that means, but he's very critical in this one tshuva in Yoredeya Reish Lamed Gimel of the fact that people are going up and making these pilgrimages to the kever of Rashbi, going up to Tzfas, going up to Meron. What about Yerushalayim? He says they've turned Meron into a tel talpios, which is a reference to Yerushalayim. So he sees it as a slight to Yerushalayim. And then he continues, this is important for our discussion this afternoon. He continues and says that, Lag BaOmer, it's not really mentioned anywhere in Shas or Poskim. It seems to develop later. It doesn't seem to celebrate a day on which there was some miraculous event that occurred for the Jewish people. And he's critical of celebrating a day when there was no Yeshua or no Hatzalah, no salvation. And then he goes on to say the opposite. So the Chasam Sofer doesn't like Lag BaOmer. Again, for a lot of people, that's a little difficult to hear. People love Lag BaOmer, but for the Chasam Sofer, there was no miracle. Okay, we know that that's when the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. Already in the Gaonim, the Rishonim discussed that. But okay, for him, the Chasam Sofer, there wasn't any clear miracle that took place on Lag BaOmer. So he says, why are you turning into such a yontif? You're celebrating it. It's all this pomp and ceremony. But he goes on to say the opposite. And it's really important for our conversation this morning. He says that when there is a miraculous salvation, we have a mitzvah min ha-Torah, a mitzvah mid'oraisa, to establish a festival to mark such an event. Okay, and he goes as far as saying that one who does nothing to mark such an event is in violation of not fulfilling a mitzvah saseh min ha-Torah, which is a big chiddush. It's a big chiddush. He draws on the Gemara in Pesachim, the Gemara in Megillah. If you're interested, I could show you the tshuva. But according to the Chasam Sofer, it's interesting. He writes that Purim and Chanukah, at their very core, are min ha-Torah, the mid'oraisa. Min ha-Torah, mid'oraisa. I was always taught growing up that Purim and Chanukah are mid'orabanan. They were instituted by the rabbis, by the Chachamim. So what he explains is as follows, that by the very essence, to establish a day to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a Yeshua, to sing out Shira to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is min ha-Torah. Again, he draws on, just for the sake of time, I'm summarizing the tshuva, but draws on the Gemara in Megillah, Gemara in Pesachim, to establish a day to give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a miraculous salvation. That, by its very essence, is min ha-Torah. And so therefore he writes that by their very essence, Purim and Chanukah are min ha-Torah. How you observe them, what you do, reading the Megillah, giving Shalach Manas, on Chanukah lighting the Chanukah Lecht. So that is midrabanan, he explains. It's a big chiddush. But giving praise and thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, according to the Chasam Sofer, that's min ha-Torah. It's fascinating. The very same Chasam Sofer, who's famous for battling against innovations in Judaism, battling against the Haskalah, the Reform, the Neologue, famous for saying Chodosh Asr Min Torah, appropriating the Mishnah there to say that anything new is prohibited from the Torah. In this case, he allows for innovation when it comes to give thanks to Kadosh Baruch Hu for the Yeshua, either by an individual or Kal V'chomer, a whole community. The Chayei Adam, Rabbi Abraham Danzig, who was a Rav in Vilna, lived from 1748 to 1820. He studied in Prague for 4 years under the Nod of Yehuda. Just had the Nod of Yehuda's yard site, Rabbi Cheskel Landau. The Chayei Adam, Rav Avram Danzig, had a kesher with the Vilna Gaon. His son was married to the Vilna Gaon's granddaughter. And his Sfarim, the Chayei Adam and the Chachmas Adam, very much halacha l'maisa, were very important in Europe before World War II, before the Mishnah Brura becomes so popular. The Chayei Adam, interestingly, was offered a position as the Rav of Vilna, but he declined, earning his livelihood instead as a merchant. He would frequent the fairs in Leipzig and Königsberg, often referenced in his writings. Only years later, because of something we're about to mention, a powder keg explosion in his home in which he lost mamish everything, only then was he convinced to accept the position of Dayan, judge in Vilna, where he served until 1812. So he relates in this is in Hilchos Purim, there in Chayei Adam Klal Kuf Nun Hey. He describes how first he says actually that someone who, looking at the text now in front of me, Misha Iralo Neis Kol Shekin B'nei Ir. If it's an individual who has a miracle, or a Hatzalah, some Yeshua, an individual who is Zochet, to have a miracle befall him, and all the more so, Kol Shekin, Kavachomer, a city and the leaders of the city, they have the right, he says, they have the authority and the right to accept upon themselves a holiday, to establish a holiday upon themselves and on future generations, and to make that day like Purim, as we saw before in the Maram al-Ashkar and in the Chasim Sofer. And he actually says that it's a mitzvah, not just is it a reshus, is it permissible, but according to the Chayei Adam, it's actually a mitzvah. And then he goes on to describe a miracle that happened to himself and his family in 1804, when a powder keg exploded near his home, and his home, along with many others in his area, were burned down. There were 31 people killed, he writes, but he and his family, only inches away from death, survived, only suffered minor injury. So the Chayei Adam, after such an experience, makes a personal yontif for his family, and he calls it Pulver Purim. What does Pulver Purim mean? In Yiddish, it means gunpowder Purim, because it was to commemorate this event of this powder keg explosion. And he goes on to describe how they would observe it. He writes that he accepted upon himself and on his future generations this day, the 16th of Kislev. They would get together. They would first begin the day with a fast. Interesting, some communities and some individuals would model it after Tanis Esther, just like we have a fast and go into a feast. We want to both experience the tsar, the pain, the threat perhaps, and then the Yeshua, the Hatzalah. So they would begin with a fast, and then they would have a feast. So he writes they would have a fast, and they would say special tefillos, and they would light candles, and they would say special mizmorei tehillim, and he goes on to list the different chapters in Tehillim that they would say, and then they would have a Sudas Mitzvah. They would make a big Sudas Mitzvah with Torah, and a special meal for Lomdei Torah. Perhaps they would invite the Talmidei Chachamim to participate in order to publicize the miracle. So that's what he describes. So according to the Chayei Adam, it was considered a major achron. It's not just permissible for an individual, Kal V'chomer, a community, to create a holiday or establish a holiday if they experience the Yeshua, but he believes it to be a mitzvah. And the Suda, he writes, that they partake of is a Sudas mitzvah, as the status of a Sudas mitzvah. And then, as I said, he goes on to describe this personal Purim that he creates for himself and his family and for future generations, this Pulver Purim. The Magen Avram, in Hilchos Purim, and the Mishnah Brura there in Hilchos Purim, both record that a community can create a Purim for themselves and for future generations on a day which they experienced a miracle. So there's this precedent for this. And over the centuries, we have tens of communities and families who establish these Purims, sometimes with the recitation of Hallel, sometimes with special tefillos, sometimes with special sudos. As I mentioned, sometimes fasting the day before, like Tanis Esther, sometimes even reading from a special Megillah written to commemorate the event. When I was in the Jewish Museum in Istanbul, in Turkey, a couple of years ago, I saw a scroll, like a Megillat Esther, which is called a Saragossa scroll, which was written to commemorate Purim Saragossa. What was Purim Saragossa? It was a miracle that took place, a Yeshua that took place in Saragossa, Spain, either in 1380 or 1420. There's a machlokas between the scholars, the historians, either under Peter the IV or Alfonso the V, where there was a Jew that was a Meshumad, he converted to Christianity by the name of Marcos. And Marcos wanted to get the Jewish community in trouble. So as the story goes, every year the Jews would attend a parade in honor of the king. And they would bring their beautiful Torah scrolls out into the street in order to honor the king. Now, you know, the Sephardim, they use these beautiful Torah scrolls, but feeling that it was not appropriate, not mat'im, as we say here in the modern state of Israel, somehow not mat'im to bring the actual Sefer Torah out into the street to honor the king. They would leave the scroll inside, in the Aron, in the Beis HaKnesses, and they would just bring out this beautiful case. You know, the Sephardim have these beautiful cases. Okay. So Marcos informed the king of this act of disrespect and defiance, and the king was ready to act. But according to the story, the night before the parade was to take place, none other than Eliyahu Hanavi appeared to the Gabayim of the shul, informing him of Marcos's plot and foiling his plan. So when the king's guards forced the Jews the next day to open up the cases, it revealed that indeed the Torah scrolls were inside. The king ordered Marcos to be hanged, and the Jewish community was. The Jews of Saragossa decided to establish a holiday like Purim to commemorate this miraculous salvation, to be celebrated on the 17th and 18th of Shvat. And as part of the celebration, each year, the scroll is read, and when the name of Marcos is mentioned, as you can imagine, those gathered make noise, just like we do for Haman. So how did this Saragossa scroll get from Spain to Istanbul, where I saw it in the Jewish Museum of Istanbul about 2 years ago? So when the Jews of Spain came to Turkey following the expulsion, they brought with them this Purim Saragossa and its Megillah, its accompanying scroll. And their descendants continue to celebrate Purim Saragossa today. I found another one of these scrolls in the Jewish Museum in Budapest. The Jewish Museum in Budapest, for anyone who's been there, is attached to the Dohani Shul, the Dohani Street Shul, and there, the scroll there, it's I would call it a Horthy error scroll. It describes this Nicholas Horthy, who was the regent of Hungary from 1920 to 1944. In 1938, of course, Hungary allied itself with Germany, and Horthy was horrible to the Jews, and the scroll basically tells the story of what the Jews of Hungary endured before and during the war by the hand of this Nicholas Horthy. You have other Purims. Hebron, for instance, has what they call window Purim. In 1741, the local authorities imposed a massive tax on the Jewish community, and the Jews, unable to find the necessary funds, they assembled to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the next morning, they miraculously found a bag of money sitting on the windowsill, which was just enough to pay the ransom and save the community. So it's good fundraising advice. So Hebron, they call this either the window Purim or the Purim of Ibrahim Pasha, and they celebrate this Purim. It's interesting. Hebron already celebrates. They already have 2 Purims, because they celebrate on the 14th and the 15th of Adar out of Suffolk. Okay, whether Hebron was a walled city during the times of Yoshua ben Nun is a suffix. So they read both on the 14th and the 15th. So now they have 2 other days of Purim. So altogether, Hebron has 4 days of Purim. It's not just communities. As I mentioned, individuals and families also established a personal Purim. We mentioned the Chai Adam, but the famous Rav Yom Tov Lipman Heller, the Tosfos Yom Tov, who studied in Prague under the Maharal. He was himself a Rav in Krakow. It's interesting. They asked whether the Maharal, in fact, created a golem. So there's a famous statement that some great Rav, some great tzaddik once said, I don't know if the Maharal made a golem, but to build a golem, okay. But to build a Talmud like the Tosfos Yom Tov, now that's a nace, that's a miracle, that's an accomplishment. So as the story goes, the Tosfos Yom Tov was held on some trumped-up charges. He was imprisoned, and he proclaimed a personal Purim for himself and his family on the day that he was released. And it includes a fast day on the day that he was imprisoned, and a Yom Tov to celebrate his release. And his descendants observe this Purim until today. And so following the establishment of the State of Israel, the chief rabbinate, together with leading authorities, looked to these precedents in establishing Yom Ha'atzmaut as a holiday. And then in June 1967, after witnessing the Nisim V'Niflos, the incredible wonders and miracles of the Six-Day War, how in 6 days, the State of Israel could launch a preemptive strike and take out the entire air force and armies of Syria and Jordan and Egypt, and take the Sinai and the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and the Golan Heights, and reclaim Yerushalayim, Ira Kodesh, and unify Yerushalayim. The chief rabbinate, together with leading poskim at the time, established Yom Yerushalayim, the 28th of Iyar, also as a yontif to be celebrated with the recitation of Hallel. Well, there are different customs, different minhagim. Some communities say Hallel, some don't. Some say with a bracha, some say without a bracha. Whatever you do, you do. Whatever you do, you do. But we have a tremendous obligation to recognize the Nisim V'Niflos that took place in bringing the Jewish people back home to the land of Israel. And after 2,000 years, we were zocheh to return home to establish a state with all of its problems, all of its imperfections. I'm not going to pretend like it's 100% perfect here. Although I always say, Urei B'tuv Yerushalayim. You have to always see the good in Yerushalayim. Kol Yemei Chayecha. The psalmist says, all the days of your life, even when you're having not such a easy day, even when you're having a difficult day. Urei B'tuv Yerushalayim Kol Yemei Chayecha. David Melech says in Tehillim, all the days, even when it's difficult. But look at the tremendous Nisim V'Niflos in establishing the state of Israel, and then with the 6-Day War and the reclamation of Yerushalayim. The fact that we can go and daven by the Kosel, by the Makom HaMikdash, that's a miracle. We recognize at the same time that things are far from being perfect here. We recognize how far we've come, but how far we still have to go. We can still sing Shir, we can still raise our voice and give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for all the Nisim V'Niflos. Even if the Yeshua, even if the Hatzolah is not 100% complete, even if we're not Zocha yet to the Geula Shlema, the final Geula. And I'll just share an idea with you. I'll take some questions. But, some people feel like maybe it's premature. How can we sing Shira? How can we recite Hallel? How can we celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim when things are so far from perfect? When the state of Israel today is not a state that's governed by Torah and mitzvos and halacha. It's not a state that operates based on Torah's Hashem just yet. In fact, you could argue people who founded it were maybe even antagonistic to religion, and maybe even today there are some that are antagonistic to religion. How can we sing Shira? How can we celebrate these days? Isn't it premature? It's not a Geula Shlema yet. So I'll share with you an insight that I had last year on Shvi Shel Pesach, as we read the Shir HaSayam, the Song of the Sea. Question: where were the Jews standing when they sang Shir HaSayam? Where were they standing? Had they already reached the other side? So it's interesting. At the end of the Shira, we read Kivasus Paro Birichbo Ufarashav. Vayam Vayashev Hashem Aleihem Esmei Hayam V'nei Yisrael Halchu Vayabasha B'soch Hayam. So it seems like it's describing in real time how they're singing, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu returns the sea upon them, and Bnei Yisrael walks through on dry land. The Ibn Ezra says that, no, this is part of the song. They are singing in retrospect and recalling what happened. They had already crossed and are looking back and singing. However, the Ramban and the Sforno explain that this pasuk is being sung in real time. In other words, they were singing Shiras Hayam as they were crossing. They hadn't yet gotten over to the other side just yet. The coast wasn't clear. They were still being pursued. They were still in danger. They're singing out to Hashem, and then all of a sudden they see Kivasus Paro, the chariot of Paro behind them, and then, only then, as they're singing, HaKadosh Baruch Hu casts the waves of the Yam upon them, and the Bnei Yisrael walk through on dry land. But as they're singing, according to the Ramban and the Sforno, they're still being pursued, they're still in danger. The salvation wasn't yet complete, yet they raised their voices and sang out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I think that's tremendously significant. We too recognize that things are far from perfect here in the modern state of Israel. The salvation is not complete. It's not yet the Geula Shlema, but we too raise our voices. We too have to sing out Shira to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You don't have to wait till the final Geula to raise your voice to sing out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the prayer for the state of Israel, I know it's a little controversial. The Tefillah L'Shlom HaMedina, which we say, at least in my shul here, we refer to the modern state of Israel as Reshit Tzmichat Geulateinu. I'll have to translate that into English. Reshit Tzmichat Geulateinu. It's the first flowering of our redemption. We don't say that it's redemption. We don't even say that it's Reshit Geulateinu, the beginning of our redemption. It's this double hedge. We say it's Reshit Tzmichat Geulateinu. It's the first flowering. It's only the beginning. It's still developing. Right? The state of Israel is 72 years old, or 72 years young. What is 72? 72 is like 70 is the new 50, you know? I always describe the modern state of Israel as an atar b'niyah, which in modern Hebrew means a construction site. It's a work in progress that we are building together, And just like the Jewish people saying Shira at the Yam before the miracle was complete, while it was taking place, I think we have the right and obligation to sing Shira to HaKadosh Baruch Hu before that construction site is complete, while it's still a work in progress, while we're still building, before the Yeshua is complete. The Gemara in Shabbos on Daf Kuf Yud Ches says that someone who says Hallel every day, Hakoda Hallel b'chol yom hariz demecharif magadif, he's a blasphemer. If you say Hallel for every little thing, if you make a holiday for every little thing, that cheapens it. You're mezalza, cheapens it. Then you're a mecharif magadif. But the Gemara in Sanhedrin and Daf Tzadi Daled indicts King Chizkiyahu and says that he could have been Mashiach, but for the fact that he failed to give praise upon the downfall of the wicked Sancheriv, Melech Ashur, the Assyrian king. He failed to give that religious experience, or he failed to give that tremendous experience, a tremendous Yeshua, that salvation religious expression. So it's this balance between, on the one hand, not going overboard, not being Akore Hallel B'chol Yom, saying Hallel for every little thing, but on the other hand, the flip side is not making the mistake to not recognize Nisim and Niflos, which the Gemara in Sanhedrin indicts Chizkiel for doing. He failed to give that experience religious expression. So we can't make that same mistake. Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim, which we'll be celebrating Mitzvah Shem this week, these are days that possess profound religious significance and meaning. These are days of tremendous hashgacha, tremendous divine providence. Days of nisim niflos, wonders and miracles, and they deserve religious expression. By celebrating Yom Yerushalayim, we express our Hakaras Hatov. give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the tremendous gift of the state of Israel with all of its problems, and the tremendous gift of Yerushalayim Kodesh. And we recognize that our story is not yet over. The salvation is not yet complete, but we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for every step along the way until we merit the final Geula. B'mehera v'yameinu. Amen. Take any questions.
Moshe, you like raisin? Bagel?
Thanks.
Okay. Moshe, raisin or whole wheat?
Whole wheat.
Okay.
Oh, wait. Good choice, Moshe.
Aw.
That's my nephew. Any questions, comments, complaints, criticisms?
Would anybody like to say anything or ask any questions? It doesn't have to be on this. It could be a dating-related topic.
I don't know what I know about dating. I've been married for 18 years. I know nothing about dating, Ralph. So.
If you want, you can just, what do you think about virtual dating right now, this whole situation? Just if you want to just give your little feedback.
What do I think about virtual dating? Look, I think that given the current circumstance, you have to make the best of the situation and use every tool that you can, every tool at your disposal. Anything that's possible to connect with people, whether it's to Torah with people virtually or to meet people and date via Zoom until we can get together. That's what we can do. It's certainly not easy. It's certainly flawed. It has its challenges, but it's what we got in the meantime.
Thank you. I agree. Thank you so much. Anybody else have any questions? Anybody like to ask him anything? Or?
Does everyone in
Bacha, you want to ask anything? You have it open.
I think Elizabeth wanted to ask something.
Take it away, Elizabeth. You have the mic.
Is Yom Yerushalayim something that everyone in Israel celebrates, or Haredi people don't really celebrate it?
It's a good question. Unfortunately not. It's celebrated mostly by the religious Zionist community. But what's interesting is early on, in the early years following the founding of the State of Israel, following the Hamat HaMedina, Yom HaAtzmaut was celebrated by Jews of all stripes and backgrounds. You had a lot of Haredi Jews celebrate. If you take a look at newspaper headlines and clippings from the period, you'll find that it's describing how there were Hasidim and Bnei Brak singing Hallel and dancing in the streets, wearing their streimloch and wearing their bekishes, and it was celebrated together, with the broader community. Things were less polarized then. We lived in a simpler time when there was perhaps more achdus, where you couldn't afford to be sectarian. So in the early days following the founding of the State of Israel, had Jews across the religious spectrum celebrating Yom HaAtzmaut together. Following Yerushalayim, in the early years, you had the Haredi community celebrate Yom Yerushalayim as well. Unfortunately, today we're so fractured and so polarized. It's not so plush.
Thank you. But even though that Yom HaAtzmaut was in the Omer.
Well, it's a good question. There is a precedent to suspend the customs of Avekus, the customs of during Sfiras HaOmer. There's a reason for it. The Mishnah Berurah, for example, mentions that when Shabbos coincides with Rosh Chodesh, as it did this year, so because of that simcha of Shabbos together with Rosh Chodesh, so you can get a haircut on Erev Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Why? The Mishnah Berurah says because of the additional sin. So you do have such a precedent. Rabbinate, together with leading poskim at the time, felt that the tremendous miracle of establishing the State of Israel warrants the suspension of the customs of mourning. But by the way, people like you have poskim like Rosh Soloveitch celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut without live music, without suspending the customs of mourning. So there are many different customs. You know, someone posted in the chat here. I see they wrote, "Do not make a bracha on Hallel." Okay, there are different customs. Some communities do, some communities don't. Again, ask your local Orthodox rabbi. Ask your posek. Okay, follow what your community's minhag does.
Okay.
همین جوری میخوام.
Any other questions, comments?
با یه دونه چیزی که ما خواستیم
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me.
میشه از
Plus, we are learning together with you.
آها
With
بابا
all the
اصلا من
challenges that
پیش رو بزن دیگه حد ندارم
it's a Shem. Next time, I hope that we can learn together in
Yes,
person.
we'd love to have you back. Thank you so much, guys. And
I want to thank Rachel for inviting me.
thank you so much. What a such an honor to have you today. Thank you.
RC, I think a few people had questions, but they can't unmute.
Okay,
Throw in chat.
Any other questions?
کدوم عصر میخوای برام
Take any questions.
Someone was on mute, and they said they can't unmute.
Oh, okay. I just did. Hi, Rabbi Nadal.
I clicked unmute all. All participants are unmuted. And if
Great.
anyone is still muted, they can unmute themselves.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Yeah, hi. First of all, great to see you guys again. It's Satya from TNAC originally. And I will tell your mother-in-law that you're awesome. Baruch Hashem, b'li ayin hara. You should get study from this. My question is, did the Chatam Sofer or the Chasam Sofer?
I see your mother from time to time.
Oh yeah, is Yofi. That's great. That's great. She lives in Yerushalayim. So I'm just curious. Our community does say Hallel without a bracha, and everybody again, that should become a point of decision. I'm just curious because again, we have to thank Hashem irrespective of all of this, and that's the bottom line. But did the Chatam Sofer and the Chayei Adam, do you have any idea if they said Hallel on the days that the Nisim happened to their communities?
So the Chatam Sofer doesn't record exactly how Purim observed Purim Frankfurt or how Purim Frankfurt was celebrated. The Chayei Adam does record how they would fast and then they would have a light candles. He lists certain that they would say. He doesn't say Dafka Hallel, but we do have some sources that talk about the Meiri, for instance, talks about saying Hallel. There are sources both in the Rishonim and Achronim that do talk about saying Hallel. The Chasam Sofer, what he does say is that the Iker, so to speak, the essence is to establish a day to commemorate the Yeshua, to give thanks to Kodesh Baruch Hu. How it's done, you know, in a sense, that's less important. He says that Mina Torah, we have an obligation to establish a holiday in which a community or an individual experience some sort of Yeshua. But as to how that is performed, how it's observed, whether it's with a Megillah reading, whether it's with a Suda, that's up to the Chachamim to decide. So it would seem that the Chasam Sofer allows for a certain latitude, if you will, in terms of how you actually observe such a day. That's why I said, you know, there are different customs as to how to observe it. I wish that all of Klal Yisrael would observe Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim the same way, but okay, we're not there yet. We don't have a Sanhedrin. We don't have, you know, one Beis Din Agadol to make such a decision. But it's a Shem. We'll figure it out eventually. But I believe that it's important to mark these days. I think they're very important days of tremendous nisim niflos, days of tremendous religious significance, and as I said, they deserve religious expression.
Thank you for joining us, Idan. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Before we do, I just want to say thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I know it's not easy times right now, but I really do feel that we have such an advantage now by using this technology. It's bringing people from all over the world together, and then we wouldn't.
Muted herself. Here, 1 second. I'm trying to unmute you, Rachel.
And we just see the reveal good in all of very, very soon. Bakari with Mashiach and here in Ameno. Just see the reveal good.
Amen.
God willing. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Right. Thank you so much.
Okay,
You guys
take care. All the best. As I said, it's a shame. Next time we'll get to do this in person.
Yeah, Alavai. Thank you so much, Rav Shimshon. You did an amazing job. And thank you guys. Thank you so much for joining.
Take care.
See you next time. All the best. Take care. Thank you.